Have you ever felt that cold, clammy fear when you realize that everything around you is a set? Not in a movie, but in reality. Look around right now. Look at the buildings they call historical heritage. We've been lied to our entire lives about who we are and where we came from. Official history is falling apart at the seams, and that cracking sound is audible to everyone who has ever been in an old palace or museum. You have been deceived, cruelly and cynically. And the funniest thing is that the proof of this grand falsification is right there for everyone to see. It is so obvious that our brain simply refuses to perceive it, protecting itself from cognitive dissonance. We're talking about beds. About the tiny, almost childlike beds of great kings and emperors who, according to legend, ruled half the world. Have you ever wondered why, in halls with ceilings 5 or even 6 meters high, where doorways rise to 4 meters, there are beds only 150 or 160 centimeters long? This is not just an absurdity, it's evidence. Historians, these guardians of the official matrix, feed us tall tales about people being shorter in the past. We are told that the average height of a man in the 17th or 18th century barely reached 160 centimeters. But allow me, if they were such shorties, why would they need doors through which a horseman could ride without bending his head? Why would they need stair steps so high that only a person with legs a meter or more in length could comfortably climb them? Here's where it gets most interesting. They try to convince us of the absurd theory that kings slept sitting up. Supposedly, so that blood wouldn't rush to the head, or so as not to confuse a sleeping person with a deceased one, or for better digestion. Do you seriously believe this nonsense? Imagine Louis XIV or Peter I, people who spent days in the saddle on military campaigns, ruling gigantic empires. And this powerful ruler comes to his bedroom and suffers all night, hunched over on a semi-reclining couch, like in the economy class of a budget airline. This contradicts physiology. Any living organism needs full horizontal rest for spinal recovery. The version about sleeping sitting up is a pathetic attempt by historians to explain a discrepancy they cannot hide. Let's engage logic and discard school textbooks. Architecture is frozen music, but it is also frozen ergonomics. Any building is constructed for a specific consumer. If you build a dog kennel, you make the entrance sized for the dog. If you build a house for a person 1 meter 80 centimeters tall, you make the doorway 2 meters, not 4. The gigantic doors of the Hermitage, Versailles, palaces in Potsdam or Vienna are not just about pomp and grandeur. They were a functional necessity for those who built them. These doors have handles located at such a height that a modern person, even a tall one, has to reach up to open them. Now imagine the Lilliputian king from the official version of history trying to reach that handle. He would need a stepladder. The conclusion is terrifying, but inevitable. Those who lived in these palaces in the 18th and 19th centuries did not build them. They simply found them. They came upon the ruins of an older, more advanced, and, most importantly, physically larger civilization. Our ancestors, or those presented to us as ancestors, were a kind of squatters. They moved into the vacant, gigantic halls, did some renovations, dragged in their small furniture, their short beds, and began to play at grandeur. This explains everything. Both the cold in these enormous stone shells, which cannot be heated by ordinary fireplaces, and the lack of proper toilets and sewage systems in Versailles, even though the engineering systems of the past, like Roman aqueducts, were perfect. The new occupants simply didn't know how to use the technologies of the giants, and turned the palaces into stinking cesspools with golden stucco. Look at the paintings of ruin artists like Piranesi or Hubert Robert. We are told these are fantasies. But why, in these fantasies, do tiny people swarm among cyclopean ruins, using gigantic columns as supports for their shacks? It's not a fantasy. It's a documented chronicle of how people who survived a global catastrophe adapted the legacy of titans. And those very short beds are simply the furniture of the new inhabitants. Small, weak, knowledge-deprived, yet very vain people who appropriated someone else's walls. But if the palaces weren't built for us, then who were they built for? Who were these beings, 3 or 4 meters tall? And where did they disappear so suddenly that they left their homes perfectly preserved? Official science remains silent, because the answer to this question would shatter the foundation of modern power. For if we learn that we are merely a secondary civilization, living on the remnants of gods, our entire political and religious system would collapse. But there are facts that cannot be hidden. And we're not just talking about doors. It's about stone processing technologies that we cannot replicate even today with our lasers and diamond cutters. Let's set emotions aside and pick up a calculator. Mathematics is the only science that cannot be bribed or rewritten to please a ruling dynasty. If we look at the official data regarding the construction of those very palaces with 4-meter doors, the numbers simply don't add up. We are told that St. Petersburg, this city of giants, was built from scratch on a swamp at the beginning of the 18th century. Imagine the scene. Thousands of peasants in bast shoes, armed with wooden shovels and copper chisels, creating the perfect geometry of St. Isaac's Cathedral. Have you ever tried to work granite with a chisel? Granite is one of the hardest types of stone. To chip off a piece of it, you need high-hardened steel tools that dull after every half hour of work. Yet we are told that illiterate peasants, surviving on bread and water, carved columns weighing hundreds of tons with perfect cylindrical forms, polishing them to a mirror shine. Let's take the Alexander column. Its weight is over 600 tons, 600,000 kilograms of monolithic granite. Official history states that this monument was carved out of the rock by hand, dragged by means of hauling, and then lifted and installed on its pedestal in less than 2 hours, using a system of ropes and wooden blocks. Engineers and physicists who checked these calculations are baffled. To lift such a weight using 19th century technology would require so many ropes that they simply wouldn't fit on Palace Square. Moreover, the friction force in wooden blocks under such a load would instantly turn them into embers. The ropes would snap, and the structures would splinter into pieces. But the column stands, and it stands perfectly straight, unsecured by anything, held solely by its own gravity and the perfect fit of its surfaces. This is a level of precision available today only to computer numerical control, CNC, machines, and certainly not to a crowd of serfs. This leads us to a shocking conclusion. Palaces and cathedrals were not built using the methods described in textbooks. We see traces of machine processing on the granite embankments, on the plinths of buildings, on the columns. Traces of circular saws, milling cutters, and drills of enormous diameter are visible. Look closely at the steps of the Hermitage or the Atlantes. There are no traces of manual chipping. They have perfectly even edges that can only be achieved with high-speed machine cutting. Who in the 18th century possessed industrial stone processing technologies superior to modern ones? Peasants? Of course not. These structures were erected by a civilization that possessed powerful energy and heavy industry. The civilization of those very giants, for whose height the 4-meter passages were designed. Now let's look at demographics. This is another bomb laid under the foundation of official history. We are told about grandiose construction across Europe and Russia in the 17th and 19th centuries. Hundreds of star forts are built, thousands of white stone temples and palaces are erected. But if we open the population statistics of that time, we will see emptiness. Europe and Russia were constantly at war. Epidemics of plague and cholera raged. Famine wiped out entire villages. Where did millions of skilled stonemasons, architects, engineers, and logisticians come from? Who fed them? Who produced millions of tons of steel and tools for them? The economy of that time was agrarian. It physically could not sustain such projects. This is like claiming today that a tribe from the Amazon jungle built a spaceport and launched a rocket to Mars using only sticks and lianas. We are forced to believe in a miracle because the truth is too terrifying. The truth is, all these cities were already standing. They were empty and abandoned. New people, survivors of some global cataclysm, came upon what was already there. They did not build St. Isaac's Cathedral. They restored it. They excavated the first floors of buildings, buried under clay and soil, which today we call basements. Have you noticed that in most old buildings in city centers, the ground floor windows go underground? They tell us, cultural layer. Supposedly, people didn't clear the dirt from the streets for centuries, and it accumulated 3 meters high. Are you serious? In cities where, according to legend, the highest culture reigned, people defecated outside their windows for centuries until the first floor became a basement? That's nonsense. These are traces of a flood, traces of a mud flow that covered the cities, destroying that very highly developed civilization of giants. And that is why the beds are short. The new masters of life who settled in these majestic ruins were of normal height, just like you and me. They felt uncomfortable in the enormous halls. They put up partitions, lowered ceilings, inserted small doors into gigantic arches. They brought their own furniture, crudely made from planks, because the technologies for creating eternal things had been lost. Short beds in palaces are a symbol of degradation. It is a marker that we live in a post-apocalyptic world without even realizing it. We walk upon the ruins of a great era, considering them our achievements, but in reality, we are just tenants who don't even know who built this house. But if there was a civilization of giants with technologies surpassing ours, and if a catastrophe occurred that destroyed them, then why is it kept silent? Why do historians so fiercely defend the version with bast shoe wearers and cultural layer? The answer lies in the very nature of the catastrophe and in who came to power after it. History is not a science of the past. It is a weapon aimed at your consciousness in the present. He who controls the past controls the future. And to retain power over vast territories and appropriated riches, the new masters of the world had to commit the most grandiose crime: to erase the memory of all humanity. Have you ever wondered why official chronology is so convoluted and contradictory? Why did the Dark Ages stretch for centuries without any progress, and then suddenly, an explosion? The Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, skyscrapers. The answer is simple. There were no Dark Ages. There was an artificially inserted pause, phantom time, designed to lengthen history and conceal the fact that antiquity was quite recent. Look closely at old engravings, coins, and documents of the 17th or even 18th centuries. Pay attention to the spelling of dates. Very often, before the numbers, there is a Latin letter I or J. For example, the year is marked as I-700 or J-700. We are told that it is simply a 1 written in calligraphic handwriting. But alternative researchers point to the obvious. It is an abbreviation for Jesus, or Jesus. That is, events occurred not in the 1700th year, but in the 700th year from the birth of Christ. With a clever stroke of the pen, the letter was turned into the digit 1, and the history of humanity instantly became 1,000 years older. Why was this needed? To cast the real builders of pyramids, aqueducts, and star forts into deep antiquity. To tell us, this was not built by your grandfathers. It was built by mythical ancient Greeks and Romans thousands of years ago. Thus, the connection between generations is severed. Thus, we forget who we are. But the most important proof of forgery is maps. Maps don't lie, if you know where to look. Open the first edition of the British Encyclopedia from the year 1771. It is an official document, the pinnacle of knowledge of that time. Find a map of Eurasia there. You will see a vast country that occupies most of the continent, from the Urals to Alaska, from the Arctic Ocean to India. It is called Grande Tartarie, Great Tartary. This is not a small region. It is the largest state in the world, next to which the Russian Empire looks like a modest neighbor. Where is this country in history textbooks? It's not there. It was erased. We are told about fragmented khanates, about wild nomadic tribes, but on the maps we see hundreds of cities: Grustina, Kambalu, Serponov. Where are these metropolises? Official history calls the war with Yemelyan Pugachev a peasant revolt. But does a peasant revolt require a regular army, artillery, and the redrawing of borders after victory? No. It was a world war. A war between the rising pro-Western Romanov Empire, which in essence was the occupation administration of Europe, and the remnants of that very ancient, gigantic empire of Tartary. The Romanovs won, and the first thing they did was rewrite history. Tartary disappeared from maps. Its cities were destroyed or renamed, and its inhabitants were declared illiterate rebels. That's when the total forgery began. Libraries didn't burn by chance. Archives were destroyed by the carload. Recall the fire of Moscow in 1812, or the Great Fire of London. Fire is the best censor. It destroys evidence faster than any decrees. Another mind-blowing fact: global architecture. Have you ever noticed that the Capitol in Washington, St. Isaac's Cathedral in St. Petersburg, the Reichstag in Berlin, and the Pantheon in Paris look as if they were built by the same architect? This is called the antique style. We are told it's imitation, but that's a lie. It's impossible to imitate with such precision and technological perfection across different continents without a single control center, the internet, and blueprints. These buildings are the legacy of a unified global civilization. Antiquity is not ancient Rome and Greece. Antiquity is precisely the world that existed before the catastrophe. It was a global world, with a single architectural language, a unified energy system. Those very columns and domes are not just decor, but technical devices, and a single transport network. Australia, America, Africa, everywhere we find the same buildings with columns, gigantic doors, and high ceilings, and everywhere the same story. Colonizers in loincloths arrived and built masterpieces of marble and granite in 10 years. In Sydney and Melbourne stand grandiose buildings, which, according to the official version, were built by convicts immediately after landing. Seriously? Prisoners exiled to the ends of the earth first erect post offices and parliaments with Corinthian columns and intricate stucco work? No. They simply occupied empty cities. This is a global corporate raid on the real estate of a perished civilization. We live in a world that does not belong to us. The authorities know the truth. They know that their legitimacy hangs by a thread. If people learn that all modern states are essentially looters on the ruins of Tartary, the question will arise: who gave you the right to rule us? Therefore, they maintain the myth of gradual development from monkey to iPhone. But the truth is breaking through. The ground beneath our feet is literally riddled with bones and artifacts that do not fit into Darwin's theory and Scaliger's chronology. But the most terrifying thing is not in the past. The most terrifying thing is that the catastrophe that destroyed the giants and Tartary was not accidental. It was a planned cleansing. And apparently, this process is cyclical. Let's talk about how the population changed, where people who didn't remember their kinship came from, and why the clay that covered the cities has such a strange composition. Are you ready to learn the truth about how we were turned into obedient biomass? We have reached the darkest and most physically tangible part of our investigation. If previous facts could be attributed to errors by historical scribes or peculiarities of architectural fashion, the ground beneath our feet cannot lie. In the literal sense of the word, go outside, grab a shovel, and dig in any historical center of any city in the world, be it Moscow, Kazan, Prague, or Rome. What will you see? You will see meters of homogeneous clay or loamy soil, devoid of humus, traces of human activity, or garbage. It is clean, sterile soil that covered the first floors of buildings like a dense shroud. We are told that this is a cultural layer. But any archaeologist knows that a cultural layer grows at a rate of 1 centimeter per 100 years and consists of ash, bones, pottery shards, and organic matter. Here, however, we see 3, 4, and sometimes 10 meters of clean clay, burying windows and doors. This phenomenon is called mud flood by alternative researchers. It's not just a flood. It is the consequence of the use of geodynamic or atmospheric weapons of incredible power. Imagine a shockwave that turns soil into liquid, lifts millions of tons of earth into the air, and then unleashes this mud avalanche upon cities. Buildings withstood it due to their cyclopean strength, but they were buried alive. That is why the entrances to the Hermitage or the Polytechnic Museum are below ground level. These are not basements. These are the former grand entrances for those very giants. We, the current inhabitants, have turned second-story windows into doors and walk on the roofs of a buried world without even suspecting it. There is another witness who remains silent, but its silence is deafening. It is the forest. Have you ever walked through old Russian or European forests? Look closely. You won't find trees older than 150 or 200 years there. Official botany claims that oaks or pines can live for hundreds of years. But why then do our forests look like young growth? Where are the centuries-old giants, 3 arm spans wide, that should remember the times of Ivan the Terrible? They are gone. Photographs of Siberia from the late 19th century show a bare steppe. There were no forests. They burned down. The entire planet burned in the flames of that very catastrophe that destroyed Tartary. We only see young forest that began to grow when the atmosphere cleared of soot and ash. And here we come to the climate. Palaces with 4-meter windows and gigantic doors were designed for a different world. For a world where there were no harsh winters. In the original blueprints of many old buildings, there are no stoves or chimneys. The fireplaces we see now are decorative additions that could not heat such volumes. And famous stoves, like those of Amasov, appeared much later, when the new occupants were freezing in the captured stone shells. Previously, the climate was subtropical from the equator to the Arctic Circle. This is evidenced by palm trees in old engravings of St. Petersburg and the lack of warm clothing on antique statues. The catastrophe shifted the poles, changed the atmosphere, and brought cold. Great Tartary froze. Mammoths, peacefully grazing on the green meadows of Siberia, instantly turned into ice statues with undigested grass in their stomachs. This was instantaneous freezing, possible only with atmospheric depressurization or the collapse of an ice dome. And now, for the most terrifying part. Who populated this empty, cold, and clay-covered world? We did. But we are not the direct descendants of those titans. We are a different biological branch. Look at human physiology. Our backs ache from bipedalism. We burn in the sun without clothes. We cannot eat raw meat. Our teeth do not fit in our jaws. We look like an artificially bred species, or refugees from another planet who could never adapt to local conditions. Those who initiated the reset cleared the territory of dangerous giants who possessed knowledge of free energy and ether, and populated the planet with us, small, weak, with short memories and short lifespans. That is why these short beds suit us. The furniture brought into the palaces in the 18th and 19th centuries was already made to our standards, to the standard of a service human. We were convinced that we are the pinnacle of creation, having passed a long path of evolution. But in reality, we were simply dropped into ready-made sets, given primitive technologies, a religion of humility, and a false history. The system needs us as batteries, as a biological resource for maintaining surviving infrastructure that we don't even understand. We mine ore, pump oil, which may be the blood of the earth, not the product of dinosaur decomposition, and maintain the operation of a gigantic machine whose true purposes are hidden from us. Recall the year without a summer, 1816. In Europe and America, snow fell in July, birds froze in mid-flight, and a terrible famine began. Officially, we are told about the eruption of the Tambora volcano, but the symptoms more closely resemble a nuclear winter. It was at this time, in the first half of the 19th century, that a strange demographic explosion occurred. The population of cities sharply increased. Hundreds of thousands of people with no past, no lineage appeared, massively filling factories and plants. Where did they come from, if there had been famine and cold before? This was the new batch, the upload of a new version of humanity onto the Earth server. We live in a post-apocalyptic world. We are children of a nuclear winter and a mud flow. Our short beds and enormous palaces are a monument to our incongruity with this world. We occupy someone else's place, and we feel it subconsciously. Hence this longing for a golden age, for a lost paradise. This is not a myth. It is genetic memory that gods once lived here, and now we do. But who controls this process? Who presses the reset button every few hundred years? And, most importantly, are we not approaching another finale? After all, technologies are again reaching a dangerous level, and the population is becoming too difficult to control.